I was standing on the 36th floor of our family foundation, in the office where my father had once taught me that success was the only virtue, and New York City, spread out beneath my panoramic windows, was nothing more than a vast chessboard on which we Wallaces always played with the white pieces, when my personal assistant, Jeffrey, entered with unexpected speed, breaking the time-honored ritual of silent respect, with an expression on his face that I had last seen when a whole sector of the market collapsed on Wall Street, and handed me a thin, unsigned envelope of cream paper, on which there was nothing but my name, written in a calligraphic script that seemed strangely familiar and at the same time threatening. I tore it open, feeling the vein throbbing in my temple, because this wasn't just correspondence, it was an act of disrespect for my privacy, and inside lay a single glossy photograph, taken no more than the night before, of my wife, Evelyn, not next to me, but in a too-close conversation with Senator Marshall in his private penthouse, with a glass of champagne in her hand and a look she had never given me, the look of an accomplice, not a woman I loved. My world, built on billions of dollars and an unshakable belief in my own inviolability, suddenly shook like a house of cards, because this was not just a betrayal, but a show of power, proof that someone who knew all the rules of this game had decided to show me how blind I was, how illusory my power was. I pressed the photograph with my palm against the marble tabletop, feeling its coldness, and then I noticed a faint watermark on the back, a watermark from a private intelligence firm I had hired 3 years earlier for a sensitive case, and at that moment an icy realization struck me: this was no coincidence, this was a message, and it was addressed not only to my heart but to my business. I went to the window, my head in my hands, and for the first time in years I felt the armor that had allowed me to conquer the world disappear, replaced by an unbearable, raw pain, mixed with anger at myself for this blindness, for this foolish self-confidence that everything around me belonged to me, including my wife's feelings. "Jeffrey," I said, barely restraining my normally iron-willed voice, "cancel all meetings, contact our legal team, tell them this is a personal crisis. And find me everything you can about Marshall and his connections over the past year. I need to know if this is just a betrayal, or if this is just the beginning of a war I didn't even notice start." I began my private war with the careful, almost surgical precision that was characteristic of me, for the American mentality had taught me that any weakness, especially emotional, was a breach in the defenses that competitors would immediately exploit, so I masked my personal pain behind endless late-night meetings and surprise audits, demanding detailed accounts from lawyers and financiers of all our assets that might be vulnerable to political manipulation, for I quickly realized that Marshall, the senator with his insatiable thirst for power and our family connections, was not just a lover but a tool in the hands of someone much bigger, someone who wanted not only my wife but also control of the foundation that my grandfather had founded on blood and oil. My search for the truth quickly turned into a paranoid rabbit hole. The first wake-up call was when our general counsel, someone I trusted more than myself, suddenly resigned due to ill health, but his state consisted of the purchase of a luxury villa in the Cayman Islands, registered through an opaque offshore structure, perfectly hidden except for one small mistake in the cadastral number that our self-taught hacker noticed. As I pushed through the layers of fake shell companies, part of the ugly truth was revealed to me. For the past 5 years, my general counsel, guided by Senator Marshall's promises of impunity and big money, had systematically diverted significant portions of our hidden liquidity into risky investment projects related to public infrastructure, the very projects that Marshall had been promoting in Congress. It wasn't just theft, it was a betrayal of trust, because I was seeing my identity as a successful businessman, a man who seemed to be in control but was really a puppet in his own play, crumbling. I tried to talk to Evelyn, but she just looked away, saying in a cold tone that I was always too busy with my numbers to notice her, and her words pierced me like sharp shards, because I realized that I had lost not only her, but my face in the world. The next morning, an incriminating article appeared in the Wall Street Journal, written by an anonymous source, about the ethical concerns about my foundation's campaign financing of certain politicians, and as I read these transparent hints at my dark past, I realized that the game was up. I had been exposed, and my reputation, my American dream, had been reduced to ashes. The complete collapse of my public persona and the simultaneous loss of control over almost half of the fund's assets had driven me into a state that, as a successful person, I had considered impossible, into a void where the only sound was the echo of my own failure. But it was at this moment of deep immersion in self-destruction, as I sat alone in the dimly lit New York loft that had previously been a symbol of my triumph and now felt like a golden cage, that the doorbell rang, and on the threshold stood not Jeffrey with another alarming report, but a man I had not seen for almost 20 years, my uncle Silas, whom the Wallace family had once expelled for lack of commercial acumen and excessive inclination to idealism, for once refusing a profitable deal because of its questionable ethics. Silas, always dressed in a faded tweed jacket and with a wise, almost sad look in his eyes, said not a word about the headlines or Evelyn, but simply handed me an old, tattered leather briefcase, saying only, "I knew you'd need this sooner or later. Your father always underestimated that real power lies not in money, but in knowing how to earn it." Inside the folder were not just documents, but my grandfather's detailed, handwritten diaries, dating back to the 1930s, that shed light not on the glorious story of our family's enrichment, which we were told at dinner parties, but on its shadowy side, illegal deals with local politicians during the Great Depression, bribery, falsification of reports to obtain government contracts, and, most importantly, evidence that the foundation's initial capital had been built by buying up land from impoverished farmers for pennies, taking advantage of their desperation. As I read this, I felt my last refuge disappear. My home, my empire, had been built on lies, and all my honestly won greatness was only the result of a crime disguised as American ingenuity. But among these dirty notes was one that concerned a contract with Marshall that my father had made 20 years earlier, an agreement to finance the senator's political career in exchange for future lobbying, and it had a small but crucial addition, a moral damages clause that allowed the foundation to demand a full return of all investments, with triple compensation, in the event of a public scandal. It was an unexpected revelation, a real trump card up my sleeve for my father, who seemed to be preparing a fuse against all his partners, and I realized that this was my only chance not only to get my fortune back but also to redeem the dirt on which it stood, even if it meant publicly revealing my family's most shameful secrets. The weapon was in my hands, but using it required the ultimate sacrifice, a public admission that my Wallace family, the embodiment of American success, had been built on decades of shady schemes and deceit, and that moral dilemma was far more difficult than any financial loss, for until now I had considered myself a product of honest competition, not the heir to a crime. I called Evelyn and met with her in a closed room without cameras, away from the public eye, and for the first time she looked not like a cold traitor but like a frightened woman cornered by her own ambition. "You think I didn't know what I was doing?" Her voice was quiet but tense. "You always saw only the numbers, Adam. Marshall promised me a place you couldn't give me, the feeling that I was part of the real game, not just a wife in an expensive suit. What are you going to do now? You lost. They destroyed you." I put a copy of that old contract in front of her, which clearly stated the triple compensation. "I haven't lost, Evelyn. I'm going to do what the Wallaces never did. I'm going to admit where this money came from. I'm going to publicly reveal how my grandfather cheated the farmers, how my father financed Marshall, and in exchange for this scandal that will destroy your reputation and his, I'm going to get back not only the assets, but something more important, a clear conscience, which I've felt for the first time since reading those diaries. I'm going to demand a full refund with triple compensation for the breach of trust, because that's what the contract says. I'm risking everything, my name, my inheritance, everything I had. But if I don't do this, then what do I need these billions for? To keep lying to myself that I'm better than them?" Her eyes filled with tears, not from remorse, but from anger, because she realized that I was choosing the truth over maintaining the facades that she valued so much. "You're crazy. You're going to destroy everything we've built," she shouted, but I had already made up my mind. I chose not the American dream, but American responsibility, and the next morning I called a press conference to tell a story that would ruin my name but save my soul. The Wallace world collapsed not with a crash but with a terrible, slow crunch of steel. My press conference, where I, Adam Wallace, admitted for the first time in the history of our dynasty that our success was rotten from within, caused an earthquake that shook the political and financial centers of America, and although Marshall and Evelyn were destroyed by public condemnation and legal action, under the moral damages clause I managed to recover not only the stolen assets, but also triple compensation, which left me richer than ever before, but also incredibly devastated, because this money now bore the indelible imprint of betrayal and deceit. After the dust settled and I had full control of the foundation, I did the only thing that made sense to me, the only way to redeem the past, even if it didn't guarantee me forgiveness. I closed the Wallace Foundation, liquidating the business, and invested the billions of dollars it had raised into two new non-profits, one to support independent journalism and expose political corruption, the other to fund education and technology development in the poorest parts of the country. I was sitting on the same 36th floor, but now the office was empty except for my grandfather's old diary and my laptop, and I looked out over New York, which no longer seemed like a chessboard but a vast, complex organism full of pain and hope. Evelyn was gone, Marshall had been expelled from politics, and my name, once synonymous with power, had become a symbol of public repentance. I felt a strange peace that billions had never given me, the peace of someone who no longer had to pretend.
Is it possible to be rich and honest?
The answer was bittersweet. Maybe not, but you can use the wealth you have acquired, even if it is tainted, to restore justice, to invest in a future that will not be based on deceit. I decided, truth is more important than success, and only a public admission of my weakness gave me true strength, even though it cost me everything I had. I stood up, closed my laptop, and walked out of the Wallace's office for the last time, leaving behind only an empty space and a new realization: the American dream is not about what you can take, but what you are willing to give for the truth.